recall correctly, I think we talked about this in one of our live guild sessions, and I explained that Glen Huey made this beautiful magazine rack. Very simple, it's pocket screw construction, and something that you could probably bang together in a weekend. So I thought it would be a great project to go over with you guys, build the one that Glen recommends building based on his exact plan, and then also start thinking about ways that we can change that design. Use that design as sort of a template, and then take it from there and expand upon it. It kind of reminds me of playing music. I don't know how many of you know, but I'm actually a drummer, although I don't really play very much anymore. But one of my favorite things to do was to take the basic beat that someone had already created and elaborate on it and just really go to town on it. It's a lot harder sometimes to make that original beat. That's really part of the challenge. So as you're trying to build up your design skills, sometimes it's easier to start with a simple design that someone else came up with and then build upon it. And you can always teach yourself over time. You'll start to get an idea how to start from nothing and go to even that basic design. But there's really nothing wrong with taking a simple template and just jazzing it up. Now the woods I'm going to use for this project are Wenge and Bubinga. I really like the contrast, and I like the fact that despite this huge contrast, they're really both on the darker side of wood color. I think it's going to look really good together. Now the stock that I have here, I actually got from Bell Forest Products. You guys have heard me talk about them in the past. They have a great mail order service, and honestly, I really do highly recommend them if you're, especially if you're in an area where you have trouble getting certain hardwoods. I get emails from you guys all the time on where do I go for this, where do I go for that, and if you can't find it locally, mail order is a really good option, so check them out. Now, the Bubinga, you'll notice here, actually has some sapwood in it. See that light strip of color here? You know, a lot of times you're going to want to cut that stuff out depending on the project that you're doing, but in this case, I thought it might look pretty cool to leave it in, so I intentionally cut this board so that I would get that material, the lighter colored material in there. Now you'll notice this stuff is pre-cut. These are going to be the sides of the magazine rack. Those are cut to 3.5 inches wide. And all the Wenge stock will make up my fronts and my shelves. And those are either cut to 2 3/4, I think, for the shelves, and 3.5 for the fronts. So I milled all the stuff ahead of time at the shop so that I wouldn't have to go out and buy expensive 4/4 material here. Now, if you don't have the planer and jointer, that's kind of what you're going to have to do. It's not the end of the world, it just means that you're going to pay a little bit more. But you get the stuff to your shop, it's already pretty much ready to go. You just rip it to width, cut it to length, and then you can start building this project. I start by giving myself a nice clean 90-degree edge on each of my boards. And since there are only 2 sides on a magazine rack, and I don't have long extension wings on my miter saw, I'm going to clamp both pieces together and measure to 34 3/4 of an inch. Measure twice and cut once, of course. Then I cut both boards at the same time. For the shelves and fronts, I set up a fancy Bubinga stop block. See guys, nice and easy, just like the hair dye, or is it shampoo, one or the other. I've got my 3 bottom pieces, that's the 2 3/4 inch wide pieces, and my 6 Wenge fronts, and of course, the 2 Bubinga sides. So now, dun dun dun, time for pocket screws. Now you guys know that I don't use pocket screws all that much. When possible, I like to use wood joinery in my projects, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a place for pocket screws in our work. There's times when it just makes sense, when speed is an issue, and there's really no question of how strong they are. It's a screw. These things are seriously strong. So just to kind of give you the basic concept here, if we were putting these 2 pieces together in sort of, there's really no wood joinery here at all, it's just a butt joint. If you could drive screws at a very shallow angle, almost like toenailing with screws, but a very shallow angle into the other piece and lock them down, that is going to be incredibly strong. So that essentially is the concept behind a pocket screw. We just drill the pocket, pre-drill, and then we drive the screw in. It makes it very easy to construct something like this. So we do have to prep all of our parts, but we're not going to jump right into that. I want to make sure that my pockets are actually drilled ahead of time, and then I'll do my sanding and finessing of the edges and any routing or anything that we need to do, but I want to do the pocket screws at this point. Now this is kind of what a typical pocket screw setup looks like. This particular one is made by Craig. It's got 3 guide holes in the top, and you could use that for various spacing, and a little brass knurled knob, and you could raise this up and down. On the side is a gauge, and that gauge tells you, basically corresponds to the thickness of the workpiece, because the thicker it gets, you're going to want to change your angle of approach. Well, the angle stays the same, but you change the height at which it penetrates the wood. So the idea here, what I've made is a little compression system here, so I can put my workpiece in, push this forward, locks it down in place, and now all I have to do is drill in this side, and it's nice and stable. The good thing about pocket screws is it's not all that critical where they go, because most of the time you're not going to see them. That's when I like to use them, is if you're never actually going to see the hole. So as long as I have 2 here, and you don't want them close to the edge, so I would actually have 2 maybe spaced about that distance from one another, I'm pretty happy with the results. So I just look for which 2 holes are going to give me the best results here, and it looks like the 2 outer holes labeled A and C on the jig, those are going to do the trick. Okay? The other thing you want to make sure is when you're using something like this, you want to remember which side is your inside and outside face. So if you have one that you really like the design on, make sure you don't drill into that face, because you won't be able to use it. So, well, let's get this in place, start drilling. Now when drilling the holes for the shelf bottoms, you only need 3. It's a little bit narrow, you don't necessarily need 2 side by side, so put one out toward the back end, because you're going to have to fit a drill in there later, and one dead center that's going to go into the front face, okay? And then another one, of course, on the side, so a total of 3. So now we're going to sand all the parts with 80 grit, move up to 120, and then finish off with 180. Now these are right off the planer, and chances are if you got your stuff pre-milled, yours is right off the planer too. So it's a good idea to start with a pretty low grit, I like the 80 grit, and then move from there, and that way you just end up with a nice smooth surface. Now before we start the assembly, there's just a couple things I want to go over. First of all, hanging this thing. There are a few different ways. If you look at the article, Glen has basically a back support on here that you can use, and you could screw directly into the wall. I'm not going to do that method. What I wanted to do was something a little more low profile, and I was going to create a little keyhole slot using a bit that I got from Eagle America. The problem is, I can't find the damn thing. I really wanted to show you guys that. The bottom line is, it's a very specialized bit for that particular task. With an edge guide on the board, you would plunge down, move it about an inch up, and turn the router off, and then pull the bit out, and you're left with one of those keyhole slots like you see on the back of frames and things like that. Put one on each side in exactly the same position. Now you could lift the whole thing up and hang it on the wall. You could also use something, it's a little less elegant because you're going to see the hardware, but something like a figure 8 fastener. You could put the one side of the figure 8 on the actual back piece itself, and then the other side, or basically the top of it, would get screwed into the wall. So that's one sort of quick way that you can do it. The other thing is, let's talk about breaking these edges. Now I've sanded all the flat faces, and you're definitely going to want to relieve the corners because they're really sharp at this point. It's a little bit tricky right now to know exactly what's going to go where. So if you just go across this whole front here and relieve both sides to smooth it out, you might actually go in a place where it's going to intersect with one of the faces, which then kind of looks a little bit funny where those meet. So you don't want to do that ahead of time unless you kind of mark out where each one of the shelves is going to go. So I'm actually going to do my final sanding of the edges and all the corners after this thing is assembled. And one more tip for you, if you use Wingy, be very careful. This stuff is so splintery, it's ridiculous. If, God forbid, you run your finger down the edge on one of these corners, you're going to get a nice set of splinters. Bottom line is, it doesn't matter what you do with this stuff. If you hold it in your hand, you seem to just walk away with splinters. Not real painful ones, but you just kind of see them all over the place. This stuff sucks, but it's beautiful, so that's why we endure. Now, since we're using pocket screws, let's not gloss over that detail. When you go to buy your screws, you're going to find that there's a number of options out there, even in the world of pocket screws. So the first and biggest distinction I think you could make is the threads. You'll see fine threads and coarse threads. Essentially, coarse threads are really intended for softwoods and for things like particle board and MDF composite materials. And the fine threads are really going to be for hardwood. So if you're going to stock up, unless you use a lot of pine or alder or something like that, something that's got a relatively soft texture, even MDF, you're probably going to want to stock up on your fine threaded screws. At least that's what I do. The size that I'm going to use is 1.25 inches, and that's pretty much standard for 3/4 inch material. You might need to tweak it one way or the other depending on the thickness of your boards, but for the most part, that's the one I stock up on, is 1.25 inch fine threaded screws. Now, assembling with pocket screws is pretty easy, but let's not oversimplify it. If you just put the pieces together and try to drive the screw in, chances are, especially with wood this hard, you're going to have some problems. You'll probably tweak it out of position and screw the wrong way, and you won't get a perfectly flush fit at the front of the magazine rack. So let's not do it that way. What we need to do is use some clamps, and the clamps are going to lock everything into position so that we can drive that screw confidently, knowing that it's going exactly where we want it to go. Now, when you do a joint, let's say you're doing something like putting two pieces together. Maybe you're doing a face frame or a cabinet door. The clamp that comes with the kit is great for this because it's very strong. It's a vice grip style system, and it locks everything into place, okay, ensuring that those two pieces are absolutely flat and flush and staying in line with each other. I don't have anything that works that well in this case. So what I'm going to do is just use a regular old parallel clamp here. Put these pieces, now the key here, you got to work on a flat surface. If it's not flat, you can't be sure that these pieces are going to be lined up. So I'm basically going to put my first one into position here at the bottom, make sure it's flush at the bottom, turn one of my clamps sideways like so, line them up, and while pushing down on both pieces, I'm going to engage the clamp. And once that's tightened, I just pull the piece off and feel with my fingers and make sure it's flush because, well, it's not. I need to just tweak it just a little bit, and once it's perfectly flush, tighten down a little more, and now I can drive my screw.
The whole process took a little longer than expected. The biggest challenge was getting the drill into the right position. As per Glen's recommendation, I'm using spacers cut from scrap. This one is 2.25 inches, and here's a second spacer that's 3.5 inches. And as you know, drilling at a bad angle can be pretty noisy. Now here's the rest of the assembly at super speed. Basically, I just keep moving down the line, alternating the two spacers. Once one side is attached, I put the entire thing up on clamps, and I make sure that the top is flush and then tighten the clamp down. I'll do the same thing at the bottom. I won't touch the middle ones just yet. So after screwing in both the top and the bottom fronts, I start working on the center pieces, just moving the clamp back and forth to each one as I go. As you can see, it takes a little effort.
Now, unfortunately, as I was screwing in one of the shelves, I heard and felt a little bit of a crack, which means that there may have just been a weak point in the grain. The way we're assembling this here, the screw is going in, and if it's a little bit too aggressive and, just the perfect circumstance, you could wind up getting a crack. So I feel a little bit of a crack down there. We're going to have to fix that, but I still need to drive my screw in there without creating any more damage. So what I've done is I've switched to a comparably sized drill bit, and even though these screws are probably not going to hold as good as the rest of them, there's plenty more holding power in this one, as long as it's locked down in position. I'm not too worried about. So I'm basically going to drill in there and free up some space in that hole. And now I can go back and add my screw very carefully. So now when we flip it over, we'll assess the damage and we'll fix it as needed. All right, so now I've got my 3 bottom shelves in position where they need to go, and make sure you double check yourself so you have your top set, your bottom set, you know exactly where your shelves go. Now these guys are really going to be a pretty darn good fit because we've already got them attached down here. Chances are the sides of these of the magazine rack are going in just a little bit, so you're going to have a little bit of a tight fit getting that in there. If you want, since we've got a nice long grain to long grain glue bond where the shelf meets the front face, you could use a little bit of glue and that'll make that joint even stronger. And so just line it up. Take the pressure off your clamps because if you don't, you'll never get that piece in. There we go. So between this great, wavy, beautiful grain here, and maybe a screw coming in at just a slightly more aggressive angle than I wanted it to because of the way I was holding the drill, we got a little bit of crack to deal with here. So we know that the screw is secure. We handled that on the other side by pre-drilling and getting the screw in there. Like I said, it's not going to hold as well as some of the other screws, but not a big deal because we have so much other reinforcement here. So let's just address this crack. So here's what I'm going to do. If you have some CA glue, you can use that. I'm just going to use a little bit of epoxy. Fortunately, the epoxy has somewhat of a reddish color to it. It's going to be perfect to disguise this flaw. I'm using this little tiny injector. Got a big pack of these from Amazon. Wasn't really that expensive. I can't remember the exact price, but maybe I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But these are great for putting that epoxy in places you normally can't get it. It just kind of flushes it in there. So I'm going to let this epoxy seep in, let that dry, and we'll come back and sand it flush and see how we did. Now normally it would have taken about a half day for that epoxy to cure, but it is hot in here. Booyah! Look at that. So clearly the epoxy is curing a little bit faster than it might normally cure. So all I need to do at this point is go back to the random orbit sander and I'm going to clean this up and sand that epoxy flush. I'm also going to go over the rest of the front pieces here just to make sure everything is nice and smooth. All right, so let's take a closer look at that little fix there and see if we can even see it now. So you can see a faint little line right here, but to the casual observer and anyone who doesn't know, that just looks like it's part of the grain. So, mission accomplished. Now my final step before finishing is to basically ease all of the edges by hand. So I've got a little block that I can use and just a scrap piece of 180 grit sandpaper. You know, make it as rounded over as you want. You could even come back with a router if you're so inclined and give yourself a full round over, but I want to keep things relatively square here. I'm just going to go with a little bit of a piece of sandpaper and just ease that edge. Stop it from basically splintering on me. Now, the areas that I'm really concerned about are where the hands are going to go in. There's going to be magazines going in here, magazines going in here, and magazines going at the top. So when someone reaches their hand in there, you really don't want them to come in contact with any sharp edges. So pay some extra special attention to the inside edges of those particular pieces. All right, so here's the final result. Came out pretty good. I really like that color combination and the white streaking on the sapwood. I love it. Sometimes doing things like that just really makes a piece pop. On this side, I actually have the rendition that I made right before I left the old shop. Now I made a few changes here, and aside from the visual aspects, there's some functional reasons for it. Now I could show you using the original design. You got your magazine here, you could see the title of the magazine, and you could pull the magazine out this way. Well, I felt that it would be really nice if I had a little bit more clearance above the magazine to fit my fingers in. That'd be a nice improvement. And then also, I'd like to see more of the magazine if I could, because right now I just see the title. I don't really see the content or what's on the cover, or at least not much of it. So I figured we might be able to improve on those two things and make it look cool at the same time, or make it look more to my personal taste. So what I decided to do here was, the most obvious thing you'll notice is the whole piece is lightened up a little bit. And the reason is because we only have 3 fronts instead of having all of these fronts. So the top one on each section here was to block the magazine from falling out. So you guys know I like to put metal into my projects sometimes, at least dowel rods when I can. So why not use stainless steel dowel rods across here? Because now I could still see a lot of the cover and it doesn't fall out. But it's a very lightweight, visually lightens the piece up quite a bit. And you only really need 1, but I thought 2 would look a little bit cooler there. The other thing that I did is the fronts themselves, I've got a pretty significant curve wherever you're going to need to put your hand to grab the magazine. That gives your knuckles a little bit more room. On the top, I just did an opposing curve just for the heck of it. You might not even notice that it's curved. It's that slight on the top here. Another thing I did, and this was just for looks, on the outside edge, up at the top here, there's a slight curve at the top, just a slight arch, where on the regular, the original design are nice and square. This one I just have it slightly arched, and I don't know why I thought it would look cool. So regardless of what you do, the key here, I just wanted to point out, first of all, Glen made a great magazine rack. I think this is awesome. But because it's in the I Can Do That series, it's very basic, and it's a great opportunity for you to take a look at it and see how you might be able to put your own personality into it and make it all yours. So hopefully you'll be able to pick up the PDF. I'll have it in the show notes. You can make one of these yourself, and I would love to see your variations on this theme.